Vivien Leigh was a fighter in every sense of the word. She fought relentlessly for the role of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, fought to be with the man she loved, and, most tragically, fought an invisible battle against mental illness. Few people realize that behind her dazzling beauty and extraordinary talent, Leigh struggled with bipolar disorder, a battle that would haunt her for most of her life. Vivien Leigh was born Vivien Mary Hartley on November 5, 1913, in Darjeeling, India, a British colony at the time. Her father was Scottish, and her mother was Irish, though some reports suggest her mother may have had Armenian or Indian ancestry. Despite her deep roots in British India, Leigh would later become famous as Hollywood's ultimate Southern belle, carefully crafting an image that aligned with the industry's expectations. To advance her career, she downplayed any hints of South Asian heritage, ensuring that nothing interfered with her rise to stardom. From an early age, Leigh believed she was destined for greatness. At just 6 years old, her parents sent her to a strict boarding school in England, where she was separated from her mother for 2 long years. Isolated and longing for home, she found comfort in her dreams, confidently telling her classmates that she would be a great actress someday. She had no idea just how right she was, but also how much Hollywood would demand from her in return. By the early 1930s, Leigh's life took a dramatic turn when she fell in love with Herbert Lee Holman, a successful lawyer who was 13 years her senior. At the time, she was a student at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, pursuing her lifelong dream of becoming an actress. But love won out, and she made a drastic decision. She dropped out of school and married Holman on December 20th, 1932. Unfortunately, the honeymoon phase didn't last long, and soon Leigh found herself torn between marriage and ambition. Despite their age difference, the couple had their share of happy moments. Just 10 months after their wedding, Leigh gave birth to their daughter, Suzanne. She was only 19 years old at the time, balancing the joys and challenges of young motherhood. But as much as she loved her daughter, her passion for acting never faded, and before long, it would take priority over family life. Leigh was fiercely ambitious and willing to sacrifice almost anything to achieve her dream. According to Hollywood legend, she proved just how determined she was when she landed a tiny, uncredited role in Things Are Looking Up. The part only had one line, but that didn't matter. When she got the call, she immediately cut short a romantic cruise with her husband to seize the opportunity. It was a small role, but for Leigh, it was proof that she was willing to do whatever it took to make it in the film industry. As Vivien Leigh pursued her acting career, she quickly realized that her name needed a makeover. Her agent insisted that Vivien Holman was far too plain for a rising star and suggested a more glamorous stage name. Some of the options were downright ridiculous, one of the worst being April Morn. Rejecting the more cringeworthy choices, Leigh decided to take inspiration from her husband's middle name, adopting Leigh as her last name. She also made a subtle but elegant change, altering Vivien to Vivien. With a name that sounded refined and sophisticated, Vivien Leigh was ready to take on the film world. Her big break finally came in 1935, when, at 22 years old, she landed a starring role on stage, playing the fiery and determined Henriette in The Mask of Virtue. She captivated audiences and impressed critics, who hailed her as an exciting new talent. With each performance, she earned standing ovations, and it became clear that she was destined for stardom. Just as her career was gaining momentum, however, her personal life was about to become far more complicated. During this time, Leigh attended a performance starring one of London's most celebrated rising actors, Laurence Olivier. Watching him on stage, she was immediately taken with his talent and presence. Turning to a friend, she made a bold declaration: That's the man I'm going to marry. There was just one problem. Leigh was already married to Herbert Lee Holman, and Olivier was married to actress Jill Esmond. But Leigh was not one to let obstacles stand in her way. Rather than waiting for fate to intervene, she decided to make the first move. After the performance, she paid an unannounced visit to Olivier's dressing room. She introduced herself with confidence, then, in a bold and flirtatious gesture, kissed him lightly on the neck before leaving. Olivier was stunned and undeniably intrigued. Fate soon brought them together again, this time as co-stars. Riding the success of The Mask of Virtue, Leigh signed a lucrative film contract and landed the lead role in Fire Over England, opposite none other than Laurence Olivier. Their on-screen chemistry was electric, and it wasn't long before it spilled over into real life. Despite both being married, they couldn't ignore their deepening connection. What began as a professional partnership soon turned into a passionate, secret love affair, setting the stage for one of the most legendary romances in Hollywood history. Not long after meeting Vivien Leigh, Laurence Olivier made a life-altering decision. He left his wife, Jill Esmond, and their young son. However, neither Esmond nor Leigh's husband, Herbert Lee Holman, was willing to grant a divorce right away. This forced Leigh and Olivier to keep their passionate affair hidden from the public, adding even more intensity to their already fiery relationship. The secrecy only fueled their desire, making their bond even stronger. Their love letters, which have since been uncovered, offer a glimpse into just how intense their relationship truly was. Olivier often wrote to Leigh in dramatic and deeply passionate terms, calling her very naughty and confessing to waking up absolutely raging with desire for you. In one particularly intimate letter, he even mentioned wearing her undergarments, a detail that spoke to the uninhibited nature of their romance. However, beneath the excitement and passion, another battle was beginning to take shape: Leigh's struggle with mental illness. By 1937, Leigh was on the brink of stardom, but she was also beginning to experience the full effects of bipolar disorder. During a stage production of Hamlet, in which she played Ophelia opposite Olivier, her unpredictable mood swings surfaced in a startling way. One night, she suddenly erupted in a fit of rage backstage, screaming at Olivier for no apparent reason, only to stop just as abruptly as if nothing had happened. The episode deeply unsettled Olivier, but he had no idea that this was just the beginning of the long, painful struggle that would define much of their relationship. Despite her personal battles, Leigh remained fiercely determined to make a name for herself in Hollywood. When Olivier was cast as Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights, she fought hard to play Kathy, believing they were meant to bring their on-screen chemistry to life in the film. But director William Wyler had other ideas. He didn't think she was the right fit for the role, and instead offered her a supporting part. Leigh's response was swift and unyielding: "I'll play Kathy, or I'll play nothing." Refusing to settle for anything less than what she felt she deserved, she walked away from the project entirely. That same year, Leigh found a new obsession: Gone with the Wind. While recovering from a broken ankle, she read Margaret Mitchell's best-selling novel and immediately knew she had to play Scarlett O'Hara. Confident in her abilities, she told her agent, "I've cast myself as Scarlett O'Hara." But getting the role wouldn't be easy. Producer David O. Selznick was skeptical. He felt she was too British to convincingly portray the Southern belle. However, if there was one thing Leigh never did, it was accept defeat. She was determined to prove to Selznick and the world that she was the only actress fit to play Scarlett. Fortunately for Vivien Leigh, she had a powerful ally in her pursuit of the role of Scarlett O'Hara: Myron Selznick, the brother of Gone with the Wind producer David O. Selznick, and also Laurence Olivier's agent. Myron was convinced that Leigh was the perfect Scarlett, so he arranged a meeting with his brother. With confidence, he introduced her by saying, "Hey, genius, meet your Scarlett O'Hara." Leigh's screen test was electrifying. She embodied Scarlett's fiery spirit so effortlessly that she left no doubt in Selznick's mind. She had found his leading lady. After months of exhaustive auditions and a search that included more than 1,400 hopefuls, Leigh secured one of the most coveted roles in Hollywood history. Her competition for the part was nothing short of legendary. Among the actresses who had been considered were Tallulah Bankhead, Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Greta Garbo, and Katharine Hepburn, some of the biggest stars of their time. Winning the role was a career-defining victory, but the celebration was short-lived. Leigh soon discovered that filming Gone with the Wind would be one of the most grueling experiences of her life. The production was plagued with problems from the start. The shoot dragged on for months, with Leigh often working 16-hour days. The stress was relentless. And to cope, she took up chain smoking, going through as many as 4 packs of cigarettes a day. The exhaustion wore on her both physically and mentally, and at one point she reportedly overdosed on sleeping pills. But the chaos on set only escalated from there. The film cycled through 3 different directors, each struggling under the pressure of bringing the ambitious project to life. The second director, Howard Fleming, became so overwhelmed that he reportedly sank into a deep depression and even considered driving off a cliff. Both Leigh and Clark Gable were convinced the film was doomed to fail. Meanwhile, producer David O. Selznick, a notorious perfectionist, made the experience even more difficult, especially for Leigh. Despite praising her as the perfect Scarlett, Selznick insisted that Leigh's bust was too small for the role. Determined to create the ideal Southern Belle aesthetic, he ordered her to pad her chest and tightly tape it together to achieve the desired look. The process was uncomfortable and humiliating, yet Leigh endured it without complaint. She had fought too hard for this role to let something as trivial as Hollywood's unrealistic beauty standards break her spirit. Clark Gable may have been the leading man in Gone with the Wind, but Vivien Leigh carried the film on her shoulders, appearing in nearly every scene and enduring grueling 16-hour days on set. Despite her immense workload, there was a glaring inequality. Gable earned nearly 5 times her salary, even though he worked fewer days. The pay gap was a stark reflection of Hollywood's treatment of women at the time, where even the film's true star was paid significantly less than her male co-star. Despite the exhausting production, the film became a historic success. Gone with the Wind shattered box office records and remains the highest-grossing film of all time when adjusted for inflation. At just 26 years old, Leigh's hard work paid off in the biggest way possible. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her portrayal of Scarlett O'Hara. It should have been one of the greatest moments of her life, but jealousy threatened to overshadow her triumph before the night was even over. Laurence Olivier, despite his own success, had never won an Oscar, and that night his resentment boiled over. According to his son, Tarquin Olivier, as he drove Leigh home from the ceremony, he was visibly seething with envy. At one point, he even raised her golden statuette in frustration, as if he might throw it in anger. Instead of celebrating her incredible achievement, Leigh was met with cold resentment from the man she loved. Still, their relationship moved forward. In 1940, both Olivier's wife, Jill Esmond, and Leigh's husband, Herbert Lee Holman, granted them divorces, finally clearing the way for them to be together. By August of that year, they were married in a ceremony attended by some of Hollywood's biggest names, with Katharine Hepburn standing as matron of honor. However, their new life together came at a heartbreaking cost. In order to marry, both Leigh and Olivier had to make an excruciating sacrifice. They gave up primary custody of their children. Leigh and Olivier's first major collaboration as a married couple was an ambitious stage production of Romeo and Juliet, with Olivier playing Romeo and Leigh as Juliet. They had high hopes for the production, believing that their real-life passion would translate beautifully on stage. Unfortunately, audiences and critics felt otherwise. The play was a commercial failure, losing them a significant amount of money. Beyond the financial blow, the experience put strain on their relationship, with tensions escalating, especially as Leigh's struggles with bipolar disorder became more apparent. By the 1940s, her emotional instability was impossible to ignore. Those around her noticed dramatic mood swings, with sudden, unpredictable outbursts. One agent recalled how she would fly into a rage, her voice becoming hard, rasping, contemptuous, and her eyes turning cold and unfamiliar. Just as suddenly as her fury erupted, it would disappear, leaving her exhausted, confused, and ashamed. Often, she wouldn't even remember what had happened. As if her mental health struggles weren't enough, Leigh's physical health also began to deteriorate. In 1943, while volunteering to entertain Allied troops in North Africa, she fell severely ill. Upon returning to England, doctors diagnosed her with tuberculosis in 1944. After a long and difficult recovery, she appeared to regain her strength, but the illness was far from gone. Years later, it would return with devastating consequences. Determined to move forward, Leigh attempted to restart her film career in 1944, but her momentum had stalled. She had dreamed of starring in Rebecca, which her husband was set to lead, but the role ultimately went to Joan Fontaine. She also turned down Pride and Prejudice, missing yet another major opportunity. Still physically weak and emotionally drained, she struggled with depression, feeling as though her career was slipping away. Then, in 1945, tragedy struck. While filming Caesar and Cleopatra, Leigh had to run across a newly waxed floor for a scene. In an unfortunate accident, she slipped and fell hard. What no one knew at the time was that she was pregnant. The fall resulted in a miscarriage. Exceptionally intelligent and endlessly curious, she spoke multiple languages fluently and had an almost photographic memory, able to memorize entire scripts after a single read, or two on a more difficult day. She adored Siamese cats and had a passion for literature, often losing herself in books between takes. Though Hollywood often typecast her in tragic roles, her talent extended far beyond those characters. She was a brilliant actress, but beneath the surface, her mental illness continued to shape her life in ways few truly understood. Leigh's bipolar disorder manifested in ways that were deeply distressing, not just for her, but for those around her. One of the most troubling aspects was her struggle with hypersexuality, a symptom of her manic episodes. At times, she felt overwhelming and uncontrollable urges, seeking out numerous partners, including strangers, cab drivers, and delivery men. These impulsive encounters were not about romance, but rather an attempt to satisfy desires she couldn't control, leaving her feeling emotionally drained and ashamed afterward. By 1948, Leigh and Olivier's once fiery love had deteriorated beyond repair. Their relationship, once built on passion and admiration, had become volatile and painful. One infamous incident during a tour in New Zealand made it clear just how strained their marriage had become. One night, Leigh refused to go on stage simply because she had misplaced her shoes. Frustrated and exhausted, Olivier lost his temper and slapped her in front of the entire company. Rather than backing down, Leigh slapped him right back. The moment was shocking to those who witnessed it, and even Olivier later admitted that it was a turning point, a sign that their marriage was heading toward an inevitable end. During a later tour in Australia, Olivier unknowingly introduced someone into their lives who would make the situation even more complicated. He discovered a talented young actor named Peter Finch and, believing in his potential, invited him to join his acting company. What he didn't anticipate was that Finch would become more than just a colleague. He would become Leigh's lover. Already struggling with her unpredictable mood swings, Olivier now had to deal with the painful humiliation of his wife's infidelity. As Vivien Leigh battled insomnia and emotional turmoil, her manic episodes became more severe. She would often erupt into uncontrollable fits of swearing and launch into long, incoherent rants. Friends and colleagues watched helplessly as the line between her artistic brilliance and mental instability seemed to blur more each day. The once dazzling actress, known for her grace and poise, was now struggling against demons that were becoming impossible to ignore. Yet despite the chaos in her personal life, Leigh remained an extraordinary talent. Her stage performances were still mesmerizing, and it was this brilliance that landed her one of the most iconic roles of her career, Blanche Dubois in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar named Desire. The character, a fading Southern belle descending into madness, eerily mirrored Leigh's own struggles. It was as if fate had handed her a role that reflected her own fragile mental state, making her performance all the more hauntingly real. When A Streetcar named Desire was adapted for the screen, Leigh was cast once again as Blanche, even though the director initially had doubts about her. But once the cameras rolled, there was no denying her talent. She delivered a breathtaking performance, bringing depth and vulnerability to the role in a way that no one else could. The result was another career-defining moment. She won her second Academy Award for Best Actress. Yet, as had happened before, triumph came hand in hand with tragedy. The emotional toll of playing Blanche, combined with her worsening bipolar disorder, pushed her further into psychological distress. Still, even amid her personal struggles, Leigh never lost her sharp wit and sense of humor. In a moment of self-deprecating charm, she famously used one of her Oscars as a doorstop in her bathroom, proving that despite her success, she never took herself too seriously. During filming, Leigh also captivated her legendary co-star, Marlon Brando. Brando was so taken with her beauty and presence that he briefly considered pursuing an affair. He later admitted to admiring her figure, famously declaring that her behind was unbeatable. However, out of respect for Laurence Olivier, whom he called Larry, he never acted on his attraction. Not everyone on set, however, shared Brando's restraint. Another co-star would soon cross the line. In 1953, while filming Elephant Walk, Vivien Leigh suffered a severe mental breakdown that forced her to leave the production. Her condition had been deteriorating for years, but on set it became impossible to ignore.
She experienced paranoia, worsening insomnia, and terrifying hallucinations, making it clear that she was in no state to continue filming. Paramount Studios had no choice but to replace her with Elizabeth Taylor, dealing a crushing blow to Leigh's already fragile state. In the midst of this chaos, she sought solace in an all-too-familiar place, rekindling her affair with Peter Finch. After being removed from Elephant Walk, Leigh boarded a flight back to Los Angeles, but the journey took a terrifying turn. Overwhelmed by despair and in a state of emotional collapse, she attempted to jump from the plane mid-flight. The dramatic episode made it painfully clear that she was spiraling, with no control over her illness. With nowhere else to turn, Leigh returned to England, where her condition only worsened. Heartbroken and desperate to help, Laurence Olivier made the difficult decision to have her committed to a mental institution. For 3 months, she remained under psychiatric care, undergoing multiple sessions of electroshock therapy, an agonizing treatment both physically and emotionally. News of Leigh's breakdown spread quickly, fueling rumors and public speculation. When she eventually returned to the stage, whispers followed her wherever she went. Some claimed they could see burn marks from electroshock paddles on her temples, adding to the morbid fascination surrounding her struggles. Rather than fading into obscurity, her suffering became a spectacle, one that only intensified the pressure on her already fragile psyche. Meanwhile, her marriage to Olivier was crumbling under the weight of her illness. Their tension was no longer confined to private moments. It played out in front of cast and crew, with backstage arguments becoming impossible to ignore. The strain seeped into their performances as well. Some theater critics even suggested that Olivier deliberately toned down his own acting so as not to overshadow her. What had once been a passionate love affair had now turned into a battle filled with resentment, exhaustion, and heartbreak. At 44, Vivien Leigh received unexpected news. She was pregnant with Laurence Olivier's child. After years of emotional turmoil and a marriage on the brink of collapse, she saw this as a chance to heal their relationship, to bring them back together. But fate had other plans. She suffered yet another miscarriage, plunging her into a deep depression. The loss was more than just physical. It shattered what little hope remained for her and Olivier's marriage. As she tried to push forward, Leigh took on the physically and emotionally demanding role of Tamora in Titus Andronicus. But the strain of performing Shakespeare while still reeling from her miscarriage proved too much. Her mental state deteriorated rapidly, leading to disturbing public breakdowns. In one terrifying episode, she was found wandering a park completely unclothed, lost in a manic episode. In another, an argument with Olivier escalated into violence. She lashed out at him, and in the heat of the moment, he shoved her across the room. Their marriage, once built on passion and devotion, had become a battlefield. After nearly 2 decades together, Olivier finally made the painful decision to leave. He had endured Leigh's episodes for years, standing by her through every high and low, but he had reached his breaking point. Soon after, he began a relationship with actress Joan Plowright, signaling the end of what had once been Hollywood's golden couple. Though he later admitted, "I'll never love anybody as much as Vivien," he knew he couldn't stay. While Olivier moved on, Leigh sought comfort elsewhere. She turned to actor Jack Merivale, who not only accepted her bipolar disorder, but also promised Olivier that he would take care of her. With this assurance, Olivier formally filed for divorce, and in 1960, their marriage was legally over. Leigh tried to handle the separation with grace, but privately she was devastated. Olivier, sensing her pain, wrote her a heartfelt letter thanking her for being noble and brave. But no words could soften the blow. The loss of their marriage, combined with her worsening mental illness, sent her spiraling into despair. At her lowest point, she attempted to take her own life, unable to imagine a future without Olivier by her side. After her divorce from Laurence Olivier, Vivien Leigh was free from the constraints of marriage, but her mental health continued to decline. Her bipolar disorder worsened, and her erratic behavior became increasingly unpredictable. In one bizarre incident, she rented a car but became so distressed by its color that she demanded it be repainted before she would drive it. She also developed an obsession with her beloved Renoir and Picasso paintings, refusing to leave home without them, no matter where she went. Despite her struggles, she continued to work. In 1963, she starred in the stage musical Tovarich, but the production pushed her to her breaking point. Her performances became chaotic. She forgot lines, sang at the wrong tempos, and even struck fellow cast members during live shows. At times, she became so unmanageable that she had to be restrained and sedated backstage. Yet, despite the turmoil behind the scenes, she still managed to deliver a performance so compelling that she won a Tony Award for her role. Her final film appearance came in Ship of Fools, 1965, but it would be marked by yet another unsettling episode. During a scripted fight scene with Lee Marvin, she struck him with a high heel so forcefully that she left a permanent scar on his face. It was a disturbing reminder of how uncontrollable her outbursts had become. Though she had once been one of the most celebrated actresses in the world, her career was now at an end, and so was her time. By the summer of 1967, Leigh's tuberculosis, which she had battled years earlier, returned with a vengeance. Weak and frail, she spent her final days convalescing at home under the care of her partner, Jack Merivale. On the evening of July 8th, she got out of bed to use the bathroom, but before she could call for help, she collapsed. By the time Merivale reached her, she was gone. Vivien Leigh passed away in London at the age of 53. Though they had been divorced for 7 years, Laurence Olivier rushed to her home as soon as he heard the news. He stayed by her side until authorities removed her body, unable to bring himself to leave her one last time. He then helped Merivale arrange her funeral, ensuring that her ashes were scattered near the countryside home she had loved. As news of her passing spread, theaters across London dimmed their lights for an hour in her honor, but the most poignant tribute came from Olivier himself. Years later, near the end of his own life, he reportedly watched one of her films and wept, whispering, This was love." Leigh had once expressed the same sentiment about him, saying, "I would rather have lived a short life with Larry than face a long one without him." Though their love had been turbulent, it had also been unforgettable, one of Hollywood's most tragic yet enduring romances. Vivien Leigh's life was a whirlwind of triumph and tragedy. She was a woman who gave everything to her craft, often at great personal cost. Her passionate love affair with Laurence Olivier and her heartbreaking struggle with mental illness and tuberculosis made her story as dramatic as the roles she played on screen. Though she passed away far too soon, her legacy lives on through her unforgettable performances. What's your favorite Vivien Leigh film? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.